Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. The support on the original Godzilla in Super Smash Bros. Video was insane. So in this video I will be making the DLC roster. I hope you guys enjoy the video and make sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you want more low quality content. And let's dive in. Once again, a total of 30 kaiju will be presented as the combatants for this DLC. I will go over the rules once again, or at least the ones that apply to this DLC specifically, in case you didn't see the last video or just forgot. Well, yeah, the rules I talk about here only apply to the DLC. If you want any rules that apply to the base roster, go watch the original video, if you haven't already, or if you forgot. The rule that applies for this one, the only rule, is alternate forms of kaiju will be counted as separate monsters. Mecha King Ghidorah will be counted differently to normal Ghidorah, you know, that's what it is. It doesn't actually happen during this, but thought I might as well point that out. And with that much shorter rule set out of the way, let's dive in with our first DLC kaiju. Gorosaurus would be the starter character of this DLC. Now, I did want to put him in the base roster, but Godzilla Jr. was also in the base roster, and I wanted him to be there. He probably shouldn't have been there, but like, the past is the past. Unlocked as soon as you start the game. Now in this DLC, you won't be able to use base game kaiju at all in the main story, but obviously you'll be able to use them in like PvP mode. Gorosaurus would have a similar playstyle to Showa Kong, with more speed and health than average, but poorer recovery due to his shorter arms. Gorosaurus' final smash would be to hit the opponent with a massive kangaroo kick, dealing lots of damage and knockback. Godzilla Ultima would be unlocked via the tutorial of the DLC. And he would have similar stats to the other Godzillas, bit of an all-rounder. He would have good health and damage with poor recovery and speed. He would take an average amount of knockback, and he would turn the sky red with the dust he creates, which is actually the image I've provided here. His final smash would be to wrap the opponent up with his long tail before firing an Ultima Spiritus at them, dealing high damage with low knockback. The third kaiju of this DLC is Dagora. Now, if you don't know who Dagora is, he is from the second film in the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, a movie series starring Mothra that was created just after the Heisei Godzilla films. Dagora would have good recovery and damage with decent speed and health. His final smash would be to summon a wave of Barum, which are toxic starfish, overwhelming the opponent with sheer numbers. Next up is Des Ghidorah. Also from the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, Des Ghidorah is an offshoot of the King Ghidorah species, but his powers are more focused around fire instead of electricity. Des Ghidorah would have good health, damage, and recovery with poor speed. His final smash would be to summon the attack known as the Fiery Pyre Road, which is a bit similar to Baragon's Lava Eruption, except more targeted, splitting the stage open and sending lava erupting everywhere. The final kaiju from the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy is the main moth himself, Mothra Leo. Leo would essentially be a mix between Heisei Mothra and Mogira in terms of his playstyle. He would have lots of ranged weapons, but wouldn't suck quite as much as Mogira does at close combat. His recovery would be good, standard flying kaiju stuff, with decent damage and speed, but low health to compensate. His final smash would be to fire the Mineral Chest Cannon, dealing high damage and decent knockback. Next up is Showa Mechagodzilla. Showa Mechagodzilla would have a lot in common with Mogira as well, boasting many ranged abilities while having terrible melee power. His speed and recovery would be decent, with his health and damage being below average, because, you know, he's got a lot of ranged moves, we don't want him to just break the meta. His final smash would be to unleash the all-out attack, firing every weapon at once at his opponents. The seventh kaiju in this DLC is Zilla Jr. Zilla Jr. would be unlocked via a similar side quest to his father, and his playstyle would also be very similar. He would have slightly worse speed than the base Zilla, in return for higher health and damage. Their recovery would be similar, while Zilla Jr. would take less knockback than his father. Still a lot, because, you know, Zillas are very light, just a fair bit less than his father. His final smash would be to fire his Emerald Atomic Breath at an opponent. Next up is Crustaceous Rex. Crustaceous Rex is from the same TV show that Zilla Jr. debuted in, and was the first of many kaiju he defeated. Crustaceous Rex would have decent health, high damage, low speed, and middling recovery. He would have a move that smacks the enemy with tar, stunning them in place for 2 seconds. His final smash would be to charge at his opponent, locking them in place with a blob of tar before landing a massive combo of powerful punches. Now we have some kaiju that don't exactly fit the whole Godzilla in Super Smash Bros. Title. Starting with Rebirth Gamera. I wanted to add in a few Gamera kaiju in here to spice up the list, and it's my list, I can do what I want. Gamera would be a powerful tank with decent speed, damage, and recovery, with high health. His knockback would be fairly average. Gamera's final smash would be to fire the Aurelium Cannon at his opponents, piercing through all foes and dealing high damage. Coming in at number 10, it's Rebirth Gyaos, specifically the Super Gyaos that is seen at the end of the series. It would have middling health, great recovery and speed, decent damage, and would take average knockback. Now, Super Gyaos does have a corruption ability in the show, as it tries to corrupt Gamera, but that won't really work in a fighting game against another player. Instead, we will have Gyaos' final smash be to summon in a swarm of normal Gyaos, sending them in to attack opponents and firing the supersonic scalpel. Next up is Rebirth Virus. Virus would be similar to King Caesar in Space Godzilla, is that he can block certain attacks, well, certain beams. His passive shield orbiting around him and dissipating beams. Since his entire body is protected by this shield instead of just his front, he takes 50% more damage from melee moves and cannot block final smashes at all. Virus would have good health and damage with decent recovery, but abysmal speed. His final smash would be to fire his Lightning of Himuiden attack, dealing high damage. I probably butchered that, but you know, it's how it goes. After Virus, we have Rebirth Guiron. Probably the most dangerous kaiju in the show, at least to Gamera. Guiron would be the definition of a glass cannon in this DLC. He would have similar health to Megaguirus or a single Kamacuras in return for great recovery and very high damage. His speed would be middling and he would take average knockback. His final smash would be to dash towards the opponent, impaling them through the stomach to deal massive damage with a 33% chance to crit. Next is Rebirth Jiger. Now yes, Showa Jiger is a lot more powerful than Rebirth Jiger, but all the other Gamera kaiju are using their Rebirth incarnations, so I'm using Rebirth Jiger. She would have decent stats across the board, not being anything too special. Her final smash would be to overwhelm the opponent with a massive combo of tail stabs. The final Gamera kaiju on this list is Rebirth Zigra. He will have average recovery since he can't quite fly, but can glide, so close enough. His speed and damage would be decent, and he will take slightly above average knockback. Zigra would have low health, more than the glass cannons obviously, but less than something like Godzilla Jr. He died very quickly in the show. His final smash would be to wrap up his opponent with his extendable tails, then stabbing them repeatedly with the pointed tip. Going over to the American kaiju now, we have Legendary Godzilla. The first of many legendary owned or created kaiju in this DLC, Legendary Godzilla would be a great all-rounder, with good health, damage, and speed with low knockback. His recovery would be about the same as Heisei Godzilla, another all-rounder, and his final smash would be to transform into Thermonuclear Godzilla, firing the thermo pulse and hitting every enemy on the screen for huge damage. The next Monsterverse Titan is the male Muto. He would have a similar playstyle to the many other flyers in this game, but he would trade a bit of health in for more damage, as well as being slightly slower than his airborne companions. He would take average knockback and would have great recovery, as all flyers do. His final smash would be to use his EMP attack, weakening all beams by 50% for 30 seconds. Next up is the female Muto. She would be a melee beast, having great health and damage. She would pay for those great stats with slightly subpar speed and recovery with average knockback. If a male and female Muto are on a team together, 3 baby Mutos will spawn in to help their parents. If one of the Mutos loses a life, the babies will respawn with their parent if they died previously. These babies would be very weak, like 5 times weaker than Kamacuras, weak, barely worth mentioning, but would be extra damage and something a skilled Muto pair could definitely take advantage of. The female Muto's final smash would be the same as the male's. Finally, for the Muto trio, we have Muto Prime. Muto Prime would essentially be a more powerful version of the female Muto, with even higher health and damage with average speed, recovery, and knockback. She would also give a buff to her Mutokin, boosting the female's speed and the male's health by 15% each. Her final smash would be to hit her opponents with her Sonic Scream, damaging all opponents in its path. After the Mutos, we have the one and only legendary King Ghidorah. He would essentially be a stronger version of Heisei King Ghidorah, with high health, damage and recovery, and better speed than Heisei King Ghidorah. Monsterverse Ghidorah's weakness is mostly his massive hitbox, similar to Heisei King Ghidorah. His final smash would be to absorb all the power from an electrical power plant, then fire his wing lightning across the screen, hitting all foes. Coming in at number 20, it's legendary Rodan. Rodan would have a similar playstyle to his Heisei counterpart. However, he would have higher health and lower speed. His recovery would be great, and his damage would be decent, with him taking a fair bit of knockback, standard fly stuff. Rodan's final smash would be to cause a volcano to erupt on the stage, sending blobs of lava raining everywhere. Next up is legendary Mothra. Her damage and speed would be average, and she would have good recovery. However, her health would be very low, around Megaguirus levels of low, and she would take high knockback. However, she would have one move that would make her one of the most annoying kaiju in the entire game, her God Rays. This move would have a rather long cooldown, but when used, it would flashbang every kaiju on the field for 7 seconds. So great to troll people with. Her final smash would be to soar straight at an opponent and stab them with her stinger. After Mothra, we have the fan favorite Behemoth. Behemoth would be a typical tank with great health and good damage. His speed and recovery would be below average, but not as bad as Shin or Augur. Having no range move to speak of, his only option in battle would be to try and overwhelm the opponent with melee strikes, giving him an almost unwinnable matchup against Biolante. His final smash would be to charge at the opponent full speed, goring them with his tusks before flinging them into the air. Next on the list is Methuselah. Methuselah would have a very similar playstyle to Behemoth, however, he would be an even larger double-edged sword. His health would be incredible and his damage would be great, at the cost of poor speed and very poor recovery. He would take less knockback though, because he is very heavy. His final smash would be to charge at his opponent, tackling them and trying to slam them off the stage. The lower health an enemy is on, the higher the knockback would be. Next up is Scylla. Scylla would have a very different playstyle to the other King of the Monsters Titan trio, focusing more on speed. She would have below average health, but good speed and damage, with average knockback and recovery. Her final smash would be to coat the enemy in liquid nitrogen, dealing high damage with low knockback, as well as slowing them by 25% for 1 minute, even if they respawn. Number 25 on the list is Tiamat, one of the MV comic trio as I like to call them. She is probably the most powerful of the three, almost beating Godzilla in an aquatic battle. She would have decent speed and health, with good damage and recovery, taking average knockback. Her final smash would be to wrap the opponent up, slicing them with her sharp fins before bathing their face in acid. After Tiamat, we have Amulek. Amulek's playstyle will mostly center about using his arm-stretching ability to fight opponents. He would have decent stats across the board, with great recovery and increased reach with some of his moves due to his stretchy arms. His final smash would be to bulk up his arms to 3 times their original size, then delivering a combo of punches to his opponent. To round out the comic trio, we have Nakika. Nakika would have great recovery due to her tentacles and would take average knockback. She would have decent health, damage and speed, and would share Amulek's increased reach with some moves. Her final smash would be to overwhelm the opponent with hundreds of fast strikes with her tentacles. Number 28 on the list is Legendary Kong. Legendary Kong would have 2 modes, a normal mode and an axe mode. In normal mode, his hits would do less damage, but have shorter cooldowns, allowing for easier combos. In axe mode, the opposite is true, dealing high damage with longer cooldowns, so harder but more punishing combos. His health and damage overall would be decent, with him also having great speed and recovery. His final smash would be to have his axe hit by Godzilla's atomic breath, charging it up, and then Kong would bring it down onto his opponent. Finally, for the Monsterverse kaiju, it's Mechagodzilla 2021. Legendary Mechagodzilla would be unlike almost all the other mechs in this DLC, which is that he is a melee beast. He would have good health, great speed, recovery and damage, and would take average knockback. His punches and kicks could also be charged by Hollow Earth energy, powering them up. This would be like a bar that you could use. His final smash would be to hit the opponent with a round of missiles, then firing the Proton Scream. The final kaiju in this DLC is Godzilla Phileas. He would be the only boss fight kaiju of the DLC, requiring the main story and Zilla Jr. side quest to be defeated before challenging him. When his boss fight occurs, he will be Godzilla Earth, and his boss fight will be the second most difficult one, only outmatched by Destoroyos. If the player manages to beat the boss, they unlock Godzilla Filius. He will have high health and damage with decent speed and recovery and taking average knockback. His final smash would have him transform into Godzilla Earth, sending his plasma cutter at all opponents, hitting them for huge damage, before following up with an atomic breath, blowing up the stage and hitting all opponents again. And that is the end of this video. Now, I've pretty much run out of kaiju by this point, so this is sadly going to be the last video in the series. Yes, I could do just a ton of Pacific Rim and Gamera kaiju to fill out another 30, but at this point, there's already 60 in there. That's about how many there are in Smash Ultimate. It feels right to end it here. Anyways, hit the like and subscribe buttons if you enjoyed this series, and I'll maybe see you guys in less than a decade. Bye-bye.